Hey guys, thanks so much for stopping by. My name's Austin. Today we are taking a look at the Batman the Animated Series Jonah Hex Build-A-Figure wave from DC Direct / McFarlane Toys. At this point, it feels pretty superfluous to say DC Direct. These are distributed by McFarlane, and two of them have very clear McFarlane style engineering, but they do technically have some stuff from DC Direct, and the name DC Direct is on the packaging to an extent. So figured it's safe to just say both. But I collected this whole wave mostly because I really like the character design of Jonah Hex. Pretty much anything cowboy related is right up my alley. But at the same time, I did kind of want all of these. The Batman variant, I think it's called like Dark Star Batman or something. In my head, it's Tech Shield Dark Knight, but I think that's a 1989 Keaton design, and this, while looking pretty similar, is technically not that. But I also could be completely wrong because I am known to be wrong. But other than that, the rest of these characters are all pretty iconic and from different iconic parts of the show. But before we get into looking at the actual figures, we're just going to go through each of them one by one in the chapters that I typically do. But before we do that, we'll go ahead and take a look at the box, the super interesting, fascinating part. Something that is kind of funny. I was going to unbox all of these as shorts, which I've kind of gotten away from posting shorts anyways, but they sat in my car in the Texas heat, and this is the best result. The plastic started to melt, and the articulation honestly kind of loosened up on some of these, which is maybe something to think about if you're in one of the hotter areas of the country or of the world. But anyways, looking at the box, this is the Ghul box, so you get his key art, but on the back it's mostly the same, aside from the fact that it just points out a different number depending on the version that you get. You get the cross sale for the other characters, and then just kind of a standard art design. You do see the DC Direct down there, so it is technically under the DC Direct umbrella, but I don't know. Then you get your standard Jonah Hex up there, collect to build, legalese on the bottom, nothing really on the top. The boxes overall are pretty good. They're really large. These figures come in at $30 a piece, which for a wave that comes with a Build-A-Figure is not, I think, out of the absolute ordinary. They also, if you notice, have a 17 plus age on them, which I think kind of comes into play when you have the characters with guns, specifically Jonah Hex in this wave. So all in all, for the price, I'm not too scuffed about it, but we'll go ahead and take a look at the aesthetics on these guys. First up on the aesthetics is basically a reissue of Batman, which I think is important for any of these lines. You want to keep your primary character on the shelves, and then it's really smart that they offered this as a platinum, because I already have the standard Batman look, but this was enough for me to go ahead and decide to get the whole wave and get Jonah Hex. So I think that's a good method. Something I do think is important to note, though, that I didn't really realize until I got him out of the box, and honestly, this is kind of a downside to the fact that I could only get one or the other. I just can't afford to buy both to see the differences exactly, but I will say the original version of the animated series Batman does not have this material cape. It's more of, let me see if I can adjust my lighting to get kind of a better light setup. I don't know if that changed anything at all, but I personally prefer this material to the standard animated series Batman. If you guys have that one, or later on in comparisons, you'll be able to see a better comparison. But this is a much softer fabric as opposed to an almost papery kind of cape. But this has, just the single side, which I do think is kind of accurate to this version of the costume, which was never really featured in an episode. So it's kind of just up to what the toy designers went with originally, which I think was a single colored cape. I appreciate that the basic Batman design has the double colored, and I think that was the way to go, but I just kind of prefer this texture and this finish. But other than that, the aesthetics on this guy are really good. I will say, I don't know how well it shows up on camera, but I do think the flesh tone is a little bit pale. I mean, Bruce Wayne is spending most of his time in the recesses of Gotham City at nighttime, but I would like a little bit more color to his skin. But other than that, I think it really matches up real well to what we see in the cartoon, and also with this figure in particular, what we see with the kind of recolor or reissue of the Tech Shield or Star Batman. But yeah, overall aesthetics on this guy. I mean, if you've had a DC Direct animated series Batman, it's pretty much the same as what you'd expect. I will say the chest is a little bit different because he doesn't have the ab crunch that the original version of Batman came with. Now, I can't say for sure if the original before McFarlane had the license way back when, if that had the ab crunch. If it didn't, then this is just kind of more in line with it. But the version that I have, which I got from the McFarlane issued series, has the ab crunch. So something to note about the articulation, but we'll also talk about it in articulation. But that's all I've got for this Batman, so we'll move on to Raish Al Ghul. I say Raish. I think that the accepted way to say it is Raish. I know that sometimes it's Raz, but that's just, wrong, in my opinion. I really like the way that Raish looks in the animated series. Part of that may come from the fact that I started with the animated series really for my knowledge of Batman, and that kind of informed a lot of character design. But I really like the different shades of green that they chose. I will say I have this head sculpt on him, and I don't know how fair that is. I'll go ahead and just bring out the alternate head sculpt for the aesthetics. Aesthetically, this head sculpt is really good. It's, his lips aren't overly visible. They don't come out super clearly, but I also think that this character design kind of had a very thin-lipped look. Other than that, though, the paint and sculpt on this is really good, and I think it sells the appearance of Raish. But for me, on my shelf, this is going to be Raish. I really like the kind of Anubis style sculpt of this helmet, even though he may not have spent too much time with it in the series. I will say something to note. It does stick off a little bit. If you pop it off, it's good that we have the double ball peg and it is very expressive, but it kind of sticks up, and the head doesn't really work too good. Or the mask, man, I can't remember words. Helmet, whatever. If you look at it overall, there's not a lot of paint on the figure, but I think that's okay for these more simplistic looks. Obviously, there's paint here. I do believe the flesh tone is a separate piece, and that the green has been adhered to it, which is fine. I mean, it looks good. This flesh tone on this is obviously much better than the flesh tone on Batman. There is some paint detail for kind of a cell shading shadowed look, which works well. I really like this type of cell shading where it's kind of subtle. It's not drawing too much attention to itself. It's very effective. But yeah, also actually, real quick, want to point out this cape being a rubber, very soft rubber overlay. It does have the dual-sided, gray interior, black exterior. But I'll go ahead and put the Raish head back on just so that we can get the aesthetics of that. That head works really well and fits very accurately. So kind of 6 one way, half a dozen another. I will say, though, when he stands up, you can't really tell. And honestly, because you can't really tell, it maybe isn't a super huge negative, but the cape is really the reason that he's standing. The cape creates the balance. It creates the whole surface. His legs aren't really always hitting the ground. You have to make a conscious effort. Well, actually, now that I do it, I mean, it wasn't a conscious effort. I could do it pretty easily, but it does kind of have that big, flowy, rubbery cape. I personally prefer soft goods capes, but this does look very, very good for a rubberized cape. And it's good. He doesn't have any trouble standing. You can get him in a pose real easy. But anyways, we'll talk about articulation with this guy later, but let's move on. I'm wasting way too much time on each individual figure. Let's look at Killer Croc. I'm going with Killer Croc because Grey Ghost was my most anticipated pickup from this line, so I kind of save him for last other than the Build-A-Fig. Killer Croc doesn't really have a ton going on for him from aesthetics perspective in the series. You know, he has a pretty simple design. The belt doesn't have any paint detail, but I think off the top of my head, I think that's accurate. I don't really remember him wearing a belt. I kind of think this is just, you know, the belt, the waistline of the blue jeans. His blue jeans have a good little cuff there, you know, to kind of give a little bit of surface detail. His little nubs are well detailed. The spine is well detailed. There's really, I want to say, no paint on any part of this figure other than the head sculpt. But I don't really count that as a huge negative because I just, you know, other than shading would be nice. But for a mass market figure, I'm not going to dock him a bunch of brownie points for not having a lot of paint. But I do really like this head sculpt. I do think that this matches up very well with what Croc looked like in the animated series. For me, the most impactful interpretation of Croc was in that episode, I Almost Got Him. And to me, this fits really well. But I think, you know, he's pretty consistent in his stylistic design throughout the entire series, and it's really good. All the way down to the fact that the jaw is a separate piece. From what I can tell, there's no articulation in it, but it does kind of allow you to have a little gap there where you can kind of see the opening in his mouth, which I really like. But yeah, overall, aesthetics are very, very simple on Croc, but they get the job done, and I'm happy enough with him. Now we'll take a look at Adam West's Grey Ghost. I'm actually curious. Let me know in the comments if anybody knows. This feels like more McFarlane-oriented articulation, mostly because of the crotch piece and the kind of interesting ankle design, which honestly isn't really in line with how McFarlane does its not ankle, what am I saying? Waist. But it's also not in line with how DC Direct did it. It also has double jointed knees, which is kind of a standard on Batman, but not really on the other figures. So I don't know if maybe DC Direct originally just put a little bit more emphasis into the articulation of Ghost, or if this figure wasn't in the original DC Direct lineup. I could look that up for myself, but I would rather just ask you guys and see what you guys remember. Other than that, anyways, on to the actual important point. I really, really love the aesthetics of this guy. He looks straight out of the episode and very reminiscent of what I remember. The cape is a very soft rubber. I hope that it holds up well. I think it feels like the kind of rubber that won't deteriorate over time. But yeah, I think it's going to hold up pretty good over time, and I really appreciate how it gets out of the way. It's not super heavy. It's not very disruptive. For figure photography, you know, there are ways that you can kind of make it work despite it not being a wired cape. Also, the hat is kind of a very soft rubber on top of the head sculpt. I will say, as much as I like the hat, let me see if I can zoom in here. There is a little issue with its sculpting. Hopefully that's just kind of a one-off issue. I hope that that's not how each figure is, but it's also very minor, so it's not gonna like completely ruin the figure for me. Also, the goggles on his head are very well painted, very cleanly picked out on his head, and then the blue is very cleanly picked out on top of that. Kind of has a metallic finish to give it that shine to it. But yeah, this is a great Grey Ghost, and this is a huge selling point for me, just because of the importance of that episode from the animated series and how much I enjoyed it and how much it stuck with me as a kid. But I think that DC Direct or McFarlane or both really nailed it. I do know that DC Direct's plastic was a little bit less quality, or a little bit less playable, I guess, than McFarlane does, and this is definitely McFarlane plastic. It's got the feel like it's going to hold up pretty well, despite maybe a lack of paint in some areas. I would say when it comes to aesthetics, the little buttons could maybe have had some detail on them, but at the same time, we're talking about a cartoon that was very simplistic in its style, and that was kind of the charm to it. So I'm not overly bothered by it, but that also could be cope. Anyways, that's enough for Grey Ghost. Now we'll look at the Build-A-Figure, Jonah Hex. I'm not going to do a big, assembling the Build-A-Fig and then doing a whole section on that. I just feel like it doesn't really fit with how I typically do my sections. So I just wanted to go ahead and talk about his aesthetics along with all the other figures. Aesthetically, this looks great. I really like Jonah Hex's design, and as a Build-A-Figure, you kind of expect a little bit more detail put into this guy, and that is definitely the case. The wrist balls have the skin paint detail put out. The belt, let's look. I mean, there's not really much to paint on the back, but overall the belt is very well painted. You have these little kind of detail points. I don't know, maybe those are meant to be bullet pouches, I guess. I don't know. The thing that I really like about the belt that's kind of a pro and a con, it's rubber and it's stretchy, and from the pictures, that's kind of how you're supposed to hold the second gun, because he doesn't have a second holster, he only has the one. I really like that they did that as an option, but just as a warning, it bends the ever-loving heck out of whatever gun you put in there. It has a real hard time being straight. So, I'm a little bit bummed out, because in my excitement, I put it in there and it felt like a soft enough rubber that it wouldn't cause a problem. But, coming back to it to do this review, it's not perfect. But other than that, the aesthetics of this guy are really, really good. The hat band is a stylistic choice, maybe not entirely accurate to how cowboy hats are typically depicted, but it looks really good. And yeah, that's actually one last thing to point out on aesthetics. They picked out the band that goes around the thigh really well on this holster. Really, really appreciate the attention to detail for a Build-A-Figure. You want those individual pieces to be well detailed. So that's all I've got for the aesthetics for these guys. Now we will move on to the accessories. Starting off with the accessories for the Batman from this wave. Standard holding hand for the right hand. Then we have a standard holding hand for the left hand. All of this just molded black, which I think is fine. You don't really have to have paint for just the alternate hands. Honestly, on a McFarlane figure, I just appreciate having alternate hands, which again, maybe this is a DC Direct thing. Then you have kind of a Batarang holding hand for the right hand. Then you got, surprise, surprise, Batarang holding hand for the left hand. What else could you possibly hold in that hand but a Batarang? Now, this is really neat. It's red. I looked it up, and the accessories that came with the original, Kenner version of this Batman Batsuit variant, whatever you want to call it, were red. So I kind of like that they stuck with it. All in all, this Batarang is not my favorite. The new Batman Adventures figures actually have a Batarang that I really like, but that being said, I don't know that that's really the fault of the figure line or what. Either way, the thickness of the Batarang, I think, is a little bit much, but, it is what it is. Then we have, I guess, technically it's an alternate hand, but basically it's a grappling hand with the grappling gun. I really like the way this is sculpted. I like the way that the paint is picked out. I don't know why my camera just hates. Anyways, sorry. Really well picked out on the paint detailing. Yeah, it looks good overall, and I do really like this. You also get a grapnel gun accessory by itself. I don't really see the point of this, but, maybe it's kind of, you want to just have the, let's just see live and on camera if, so the holding, let's get in focus real quick. The holding hand can do a pretty good job of holding it. So maybe, I don't know, you want it kind of drawing off his belt. Either way, it's neat to have this as an extra piece, and I appreciate it. Then we have, next in line, Ghul. His hands are kind of different, because if you see on the original figure, The hands are all one molded piece, and you pop them off from the forearm, which is fine. It doesn't really make a huge difference. It does mean that you don't get wrist articulation, which is unfortunate. You can only swivel. I don't know. I think I would personally prefer just swappable hands. I don't really know why this choice was made, but is what it is. You get this left kind of relaxed hand, then you get a right relaxed hand. Big surprise, well sculpted. These hands pop in and out pretty effectively. Then you get a man. What is happening here? Kind of a gripping hand for Raish, and I think the general idea is to just pop it into whatever part of the helmet, because spoiler alert, that's the only quote-unquote accessory you get, but it does a good job of holding it depending on where you want to put it, so that's kind of neat. Then you get the other holding hand, the right holding hand. Exciting stuff, really fascinating, really great, really knocks your socks off. Going on to Killer Croc, we get kind of a expressive, angry right hand. Really like the sculpting on that. Expressive, angry left hand. Again, really good sculpting. No paint on them. You see the claw detailing there, but there's no differentiation in the actual sculpt or paint, which is maybe a little bit unfortunate. Then you get a gripping, relaxed, just kind of an open hand without being super aggressive. If you have other figures with other accessories, maybe there's something where this would work well, but I'm always a fan of alternate hands, so that's good. And then you also get the other left hand for that kind of more open. The hands are abundant with these figures, which is cool, but not really a huge deal. Then moving on to the Grey Ghost, we get his pencil holding hand. Now this pencil is absolutely ruined. It is completely not straight at all. Kind of looks like he's just holding a wet carrot stick. But overall, it's fine. I'm probably not going to have it for much of anything, but it's good. It does the job. Then you get this right holding, gripping type hand, and what you would grip it with is this very well detailed Grey Ghost. I don't know why my camera just does not want to focus in on this stuff, but very well detailed Grey Ghost VHS box. I really like this. This is probably the best accessory of the set for me. Just the detailing on it and the reference. I mean, it's super clean. I'm very happy with it. You also get the little remote control RC car bomb with the little camera on there. Very well detailed. The one very well tampoed on there. Probably not painted, but very well done. And the little fuse here, or the antenna, I can't really remember. It's very well done. Then you get this little gun accessory also for the Grey Ghost. Very well sculpted, but no paint on it, which is kind of a bummer. But you get a really solid lineup of accessories with all of these figures, and I would say overall that's pretty good. But then we have Jonah Hex's accessories. To my eye, this is a Colt Navy revolver. I really think it is. I could be wrong. I think there's also like a Dragoon revolver, which might just be another alternate name for the Navy. But overall, the detail on this is really, really good. Ignore how incredibly bent it is. I will say this comes out of the holster of Jonah Hex. So unfortunately, because of how soft the plastic is on these revolvers, it might not really matter which option you use for stowing it. It might just get bent no matter what. But they're identical, so you get two of them, and they do look really good. Heating them up would probably straighten them out if you have one that's bent like this, but I'm overall kind of bummed that it seems like it doesn't really matter how you store them. They'll get bent. But the revolvers are well done, and it's always nice to see firearms with a McFarlane figure because we know how WB is about that. Then you also get this kind of skinning knife, pretty standard cowboy knife, maybe a little bit big for a fixed blade, but very well detailed, well painted, simple, but I think it gets the job done. You could probably argue that it would be nice to have like a wood handle, because more than likely he's going to have a wood handled knife being a cowboy, but you know, it's Batman the Animated Series. It's an animated series, so they're more than likely going to depict the knife like this anyways, so I think I'm being a little bit pedantic when I say that. But yeah, really happy with the accessories overall. We probably could have gotten a little bit more for Jonah Hex, maybe some alternate hands. He's kind of stuck with his gripping trigger finger hands, which get the job done. You know, I don't know who's going to be displaying Jonah Hex without some kind of weapon in hand, but that's maybe my one point of contention for the wave as a whole. I think other than that, we've got really good accessories overall, but that's all I've got, so we'll move on to the articulation. Looking at the articulation now for the Batman of this wave, I will say overall I'm not going to be as harsh with the articulation on these guys as I am with other figures, just because of the style that they're going for. These guys have never had traditional articulation, even back when DC Direct originally sent them out, so I'm not expecting McFarlane to completely redesign the sculpts on these guys, even though that would be kind of nice, but just kind of a disclaimer to get out of the way there. But we have a pretty simple ball peg in the neck that, for this Batman, let me see if I can pop it off. Yeah. It is extremely deep set and locked in. You're getting nothing on the neck side of that peg. It is locked in there. And then you put the head on, and at the end of the day, it's pretty much just a swivel joint. I mean, let me just, full posterity, you're getting very little up and down and very little side to side. And I say very little nicely. You know, when you really look at it, it's really just a swivel. But then we get down to the shoulder. Move the cape out of the way. The shoulder does go up. It's kind of stiff here, probably from kind of sitting around, but does go up about that far, so just about 90. I'd kind of like to see a little bit more. You know, I think we probably could have gotten a little bit deeper out of that joint, so not the best in the world. Then you get 90-degree single jointed elbows with a swivel. Again, you know, for it being Batman, I would like to see a little bit more articulation on him, but just is what it is. Then every hand gets this kind of standard hinge joint, and then a swivel for 360 degrees, then kind of in and out movement, which works well enough. I'm happy with that for a mass market figure. The chest gets nothing at all in the way of any kind of crunch. It is just a fixed piece of plastic with some good paint. And then you get a swivel at the waist. Then going down to the waist, we get very, very tight ball joints for the waist. Goes back basically nothing. You can kind of, I mean, maybe you could argue that it's going back, but it, you know, at a certain point it's just going out. So further back you go, the more out it goes, because his butt is just too much in the way. But that's okay. Splits, we get very, very solid. Pretty much as you could want from a Batman. Really good splits, so happy with that. Then knees are, move the cape. Knees are double jointed, and they're, you know, they have pretty tight indents, but I think that works overall. They're not so bad that they're really inhibiting articulation. You can kind of get whatever you want out of it. And yeah, the knees are probably the best part of this figure. Then you get what I would say is boot cut. I'm pretty sure, you know, it might just be that it's a separate piece, but I mean, you know, it works as boot cut, so like that. Good articulation there. Then you have very standard ankle joints. You can go up and down, and then you have a front-facing pin, so you can pivot side to side really well. Really like that. All in all, articulation on Batman, for it being the kind of hero figure, I would like to see a little bit more. But again, this is a DC Direct figure that McFarlane is basically just reissuing, in this case with different colors. But then, if we want to look at Raish Al Ghul, I'm going to try and keep it simple here. The cape, obviously, if you take away the cape, the articulation is going to be a little bit better. But who's going to be displaying this guy without the cape? It's kind of a key ingredient in his overall appearance. So I'm going to leave it on, and I'm going to say this is his articulation with the cape because, that's just me. His head, much more expressive than Batman's, much less limited, my bad. Very good side to side, very, very good back. Solid down, pretty much as much as, well, I mean, maybe you could want a little bit more, but I think it works really well, especially for the head design, and then obviously, all the way around. For the shoulder, you're obviously going to be limited by these cape bits, so it's not going to go all the way out. If you move it back out of the way, you can get his shoulder out and then kind of, sweep the cape a little bit and get a little bit out if you really want that articulation. I mean, you could probably do some pretty good poses with that, kind of make it look like he's moving his cape out of the way, but then you get the shoulder moving up like that. Then we get standard. Well, there goes his hand. That is kind of an issue that you run into with this figure in particular, because the hands are swapping at the forearm. When you're trying to articulate it, it's a little bit different. But anyways, single jointed elbows go up that deep and swivel, so same as Batman, but then the wrists are fixed and you get this kind of forearm swivel, which is clean at the break, so it's not really causing a huge issue depending on where you want to put it, aside from the fact that obviously that's not anatomically possible, but good enough. I would like to have seen a more traditional style joint, but I also understand that these are very, very small hands, so it works. Kind of up to you on what you're okay with. Then you get nothing at the chest, which is kind of standard for this line. Then you get the waist swivel, so really exciting stuff. Then you get the patented, tried and true DC Direct, incredibly ugly waist joint. I will say it allows, well, it doesn't really allow crazy good forward, but it does allow more back than the Batman does. He's kicking out because of the cape, so really, really exciting if you wanted really strong back kick. This is just an exceptionally good pose, I must say. Really proud of myself with how good that looks. Then you get very, very good splits, and they look fine. These DC Direct crotch joints are just really goofy looking, and they're of the time, if you will, but you do get really solid splits, so that's exciting. A single jointed knee that goes that far back, so not quite 90, close, but no cigar. Then you get no boot cut. That's kind of funny. I just assumed you got boot cut, but no. So there is no swivel whatsoever in the knee, which is kind of funny. I've never really noticed it because of the cape being the reason that he's balanced, but you get standard hinges on the ankles, which is, unfortunate for a modern day action figure. You kind of have to expect or know what you should expect with these DC Direct figures. Then moving on, we've got Croc. Croc has a little bit more interesting articulation. I'm not going to keep wasting time on this. His up is, also his neutral. His down is pretty good, depending on how you angle it. He gets, side to side. Pretty good attitude. Then looking at the shoulder joint, that is as far out as we get, not quite 90, which is unfortunate. You get, standard all the way around, depending on how you want to articulate it. Then you get down to your elbow, single jointed with a swivel. Not the best, not the worst. Well, yeah, not the worst. Then you get standard hinge jointed wrists with a full 360-degree swivel. Really exciting stuff. But in this case, with his chest, we actually get a diaphragm joint that allows for some swivel right there and an ab crunch, which, to be fair, is really ugly and is not super usable, but it does allow for some more attitude on your poses, which is good. Especially with this guy, he's kind of top heavy, and it's good to be able to balance him with this stuff, and all of that stuff does come in handy, so I appreciate having it. The waist does not have a swivel, which is totally fine because of that, so that works. Then you get standard DC direct. You kind of know what you expect with this crotch. Does not go forward like almost at all, and actually doesn't even go back super good, but its splits are incredible, and that's really all you've ever wanted your action figures to do, right? Is the splits. I don't know why DC Direct ever did this, but it's fine of the time. Single jointed knees, not the best in the world, kind of ugly. And then you get down to the feet on this guy, and this is the classic DC Direct foot. This is how they did their Joker, and it's kind of it rears its ugly head every once in a while, but all you get is a swivel. There is no other articulation point at the ankle. So Croc has some good spots and some less than good spots. Pretty much everything at the lower body is not a good spot. Then we'll move on to Grey Ghost, which mattered the most to me as far as articulation goes. His head is pretty expressive. He's got, interestingly enough, a hinge joint at the neck. So his down is kind of limited by the cape, but his up, very good. Really like that. Of course, as we know with ball and hinge joints, I am not a fan of that. I am in that camp because we get almost nothing when it comes to any kind of attitude on the head. It does swivel all the way around, but pretty much all you're going to get him to do is look directly up. So really exciting stuff. We get down to his shoulders. Same thing. We're kind of expecting this at this point. It gets pretty much up to 90, and that's all we're getting out of it. Then, it'll go all the way around if you want it to, with the cape kind of getting in the way, but not entirely because of the soft rubber. Single jointed elbow goes about that far. Then you get your elbow swivel, which is really important for an action figure. He gets a little bit over 90, which is good. Then you get down to your wrists and typical hinge joint wrist and swivel. So really exciting stuff. Once again, very fascinating. Then we get down to the waist joint, and this is where I'm kind of unsure if this is a McFarlane, because he does have a soft crotch piece, kind of a diaper, but he doesn't have the McFarlane style joints. He just has ball pegs in there. But his splits are not quite as good as we would see from Batman, or the DC Direct figures. But his up is really good. His back is probably I don't want to cheat it. His back is probably the best of the wave. Obviously, we've seen better on other figures, but it looks pretty good. And the rubber diaper gets out of the way really well. Then you have double jointed knees. We're finally back to the double joints from Batman. Very exciting stuff. Good articulation. Despite this guy maybe not being the most incredibly bombastic, dynamic character, he does have really good articulation joints. So that's exciting for those of you like me who wanted a good Grey Ghost. He's pretty good when it comes to articulation. Standard, hinge joint for the ankle, and then pivot with that front-facing pin. So good stuff. Probably better than most articulation on this guy, and that is what makes me wonder if maybe this was just DC Direct doing some more stuff with their figures, or if it's a McFarlane. I actually am realizing as I said it that I didn't cover the way, or the chest, the diaphragm, and that's because there is literally nothing in the diaphragm to do. He doesn't have any kind of swivel or crunch or anything. So important to note that is a very weak spot in his articulation. Then getting on to Jonah Hex. With this, interestingly, the hair and the cowboy hat are very soft rubber, so they both get out of the way really well. He is on a double ball peg in there, which allows for all the way around, so he can do the Exorcist owl spin, which is really exciting, really breathtaking stuff. He looks up really well, looks down super well, very good, which is absolutely what you want from a cowboy. You need him to be able to hide his eyes. And then you get some attitude on there, a little bit of side to side. Really expressive, really like that. So I'm very happy with the way that they did the head, especially with the hair getting out of the way effectively. You also have this duster, which also does a good job of getting out of the way. You get to your shoulder, and it goes also 90, not breaking the mold there. Then I'm realizing how repetitive this section is getting, but anyways, you've got single jointed elbow that goes up to 90 and a swivel. Exciting stuff. Then we get to these joints are more like McFarlane style joints where they can, hinge up and down, or actually no, they're not McFarlane style. They just hinge. They have a pistol grip hinge because they're pistols. But so yeah, actually it doesn't do the McFarlane style where depending on how you articulate it, it does it differently. But then we get to chest has nothing. The articulation point is at the waist where you can swivel like any other DC Direct. I'm gonna just go ahead and get that out of the way. Then we can move the kick. Pretty good, pretty solid. Basically 90. It kind of starts to go down because of that soft rubber diaper. Then your back is pretty good. That's how much it goes without, me pushing it. So not the best, not the worst. Single jointed knees. That's as far as they go back. So not quite 90, but good for a cowboy. It gets the job done. And then you have simple hinge joints at the ankles, and they kind of have a front-facing pen, but they don't. I mean, they make use of it as much as they can, but they just, there's boots, there's jeans in the way of the boots. So pretty good overall. They're DC Direct figures. I would say articulation on these guys is exactly what you'd expect. They're not breaking the mold in any way at all because they are a reuse of existing molds. So I'm happy enough with them for what they're doing, but don't expect anything magical from these articulation points. So now we'll move on to comparison. First off, here's all of them standing straight up and down. They look good. Overall scaling seems to match. I would imagine Jonah Hex would be kind of on the taller side. I would imagine Croc would obviously be considerably taller than the rest of them, and I'm not surprised to see Raish, a little bit smaller than Batman. I'm not going to keep all of them for each individual comparison just because of, my camera, but we'll go ahead and move on to the next one, which is the new Batman Adventures Batgirl and Batman Simplified redesign. I actually really like this design for Batman, but all in all, the overall redesigns of the new Batman Adventures were a little bit less than preferable. I will say, just trying to get these figures to stand up straight for an entire segment of a video is making me realize just how much the articulation is outdated and frustrating. But that's not really the point here. The point is to compare these figures. The two Batmen aren't perfectly in scale. I think the new Batman Adventures Batman is a little bit bigger, a little bit broader, but with a different art style, it's not the end of the world for me. And then I think the Batgirl is maybe a little bit small, but the female characters in that show were small. So I think the comparison between these guys is pretty solid, and the Killer Croc looks sufficiently taller than these characters, even with them being a little bit different in scale. But next we have, now looking at the classic Batman the Animated Series, Batman and Robin figures. Again, these guys are basically just the same sculpt, but with a redesign or a repaint. But this does have a ab crunch that this guy does not have. So that's kind of a letdown. It does help a little bit with articulation, but also, as discussed, the articulation on these guys are really rough. Something that I do think these re-releases are getting better about is the overall cell shading. I'm not sure how clear it is if I zoom. Well, that's not really helping anything. I'm not going to move these figures around because they are going to fall if I move them. They are very precariously positioned for where they need to be. But you can kind of tell these figures have cell shading that is very heavy, very distracting. I will go ahead and move this guy just so you can see what I'm talking about. That's cell shading, but it just kind of looks like a very gross streak of refuse sliding down his face, which I don't prefer. And while I will say this oh, cool, he's standing just fine. This Batman does have a paler face, which I'm not a huge fan of. I will say that's better than the very heavy cell shading of the earlier releases. So I do think they're getting better in that direction. But that also kind of means that they're just applying less paint. So I don't know. Maybe I'm... It's kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because it's such a difficult discussion to have over, you know, is paint better? Is paint worse because it is causing an aesthetic issue? I don't know. It's kind of a decision that you have to make for yourself. The other thing important to note, the capes are different, as stated. I do like the new capes considerably more. There's more fabric to them. I do like the 2-sided nature of the original Batman, but with these recolors, that's totally fine with me. That it's a single color, and I really just do like the fabric more. So I don't have a ton of stuff to look at from this line. I figured these would be kind of your best bets at a general idea of what the scaling is, because if you're collecting this line, you almost definitely have at least one of these 4 guys. So that's all I've got for comparisons. Now let's go ahead and wrap it up. Wrapping up this review of the McFarlane Toys DC Direct Batman the Animated Series Jonah Hex Build-A-Wave, I really like the sculpt work of these figures, and they definitely do a good job of fitting into the universe. And if you already are collecting these figures, they fit in very well. Overall, I'm happy with them, but they will all immediately be going on figure stands. And if one of them falls during this conclusion, I'm just going to roll with it, because the articulation and the proportions all come together in this cavalcade of impossible to pose nightmare. They're exceptionally lacking in articulation. They're very outdated, which is, I think, a choice. You know, the DC Direct line is on the older side, and McFarlane would have to completely redesign these figures. And at that point, you know, it's not really the same line anymore. That being said, it does not free them from any criticism about the articulation. It's disappointing that they are as limited as they are. But you can see them, you know, they look good. They have the potential for poses, especially if you put them on some kind of figure stand. And yeah, overall, I'm happy with it. I'm just not totally over the moon ecstatic with the development process of these guys. I think that they could have probably made some improvements here and there to make them a little better. But that being said, I do a ranking system here. It goes entry grade, or first grade, high grade, real grade, master grade, perfect grade. And the general idea of that is, you know, if I'm not recommending it, I would say first grade. If I'm saying that this is a titan of industry, you know, sets a new standard in action figures, collectibles, that sort of thing, I'd go perfect grade. I think for these, I have to go high grade. The price point, you know, with each one coming in at basically $25, if you want the Build-A-Figure, I don't think that's too bad. I think the paint work is acceptable for the style. I think that the material choices is very solid. But overall, I don't feel good about giving them any more than that, because they are outdated, and with that comes the issues of an outdated figure. So that's pretty much all I've got for these guys. I hope this didn't drone on for too long, because I know I had a lot of figures to get through, but I figured I'd just go ahead and knock them all out with one video. But hope you guys enjoyed, and all right, have a good one.